Welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers, a once a week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. We thank you for joining us today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, be sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and catch the great hockey content at thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed. You can find us at SabersScoop, THW, and everything else at the Hockey Writers. Gentlemen, the trade deadline has now passed us. We are in the final stretch here. Buffalo, I don't think they're going to be a playoff team by the looks of it. I think that's the kind way of putting it, guys. Brandon, let's kick off the headlining trade here in Buffalo, and that's Taylor Hall.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And, just to add to, what you said about the playoffs, I saw the Sabres are still not mathematically eliminated as of tonight. So never say never, right? But talking about Taylor Hall, you called it, Jordan. I know you've been tweeting about it, but here we say it on this show officially. You called it. He went to the Boston Bruins. And I got to tell you, that's not where I saw him going, but that's where he went. And it was for what you said, a second round pick in this year's draft. And like you said, a middling type prospect, Anders Bjork. Wouldn't call him so much a prospect as sort of an established NHL player. He's 24 years old right now. Hasn't quite cracked the Bruins lineup, but he's looked good in a Sabres jersey. 1 goal, 2 assists in 3 games so far. I actually wrote an article about this being an underwhelming return. As for what the Sabres got, I still sort of agree, even though Bjork has impressed. What do you guys think? Let's jump right to you, Nick.
Yeah, we were hearing about this all over the Twitterverse, all over all the talk shows covering the trade deadline, how underwhelming the return for Taylor Hall was. And I think, I don't think anyone really expected a first round pick, but I think most people expected more than a second rounder in Anders Bjork. And we forget the Sabres also sent Curtis Lazar over to Boston. So this wasn't exactly a 1-for-2 trade. So I think the Athletics' Don Lucian really went in on the Sabres. I believe he gave them an F- in his trade grades. I'm not going to be that harsh, but I think the main problem a lot of people have, and I agree, is Kevin Adams did not wait this out. This was a late, almost midnight deal that pretty much 15 hours before the trade deadline. And from all indications, Taylor Hall was heading to Boston to come hell or high water. But you look at the return and it doesn't do much for you. That second round pick's probably not going to be a high second round pick. Those play at that point in the draft, you're getting into very 50-50 territory as to whether that player is going to be a contributor. And I think Adams was put in just an impossible situation with Hall's production, his no movement clause, which we'll get into, the $8 million contract, which the Sabres are eating half of. And the Sabres just did not have a lot of leverage here. And I think that goes into them just not getting the return they wanted.
Yeah, guys, I'm just gonna say it. The Sabres flat out failed in this return package. I'm sorry, but Anders Bjork, who has looked good, and I think he honestly will be a decent member of this team even next season if they keep him around. Which let's hope they do. Hopefully, this isn't a Dominic Cahoon situation like last year. This is Taylor Hall who won the MVP in 2018. That was 3 years ago. Yeah, that was the outlier season for this player, but Nick Foligno went for a first round pick. David Savard got a first round pick back. And yeah, I understand the no movement clause, which we're just about to get into here. But this is Taylor Hall. I get he's only scored 2 goals and had 19 points in 37 games. But his expected goals numbers were so good. His shooting percentage was at 2.7%, guys. There was actually a funny compilation I saw, like of all of his breakaways that he's missed so far this season. Like this guy, he's just so unlucky, completely snake bitten. And let's just talk about this because apparently, he really wanted to be a Boston Bruin, so he waived his no trade clause to go to Boston, and that probably, like most people are, theorizing that was the main factor in why they only received that second round pick in return as opposed to the first. I also found it interesting. Rachel Dory on her podcast, Staff and Graph, with Mike Stevens, said that the Islanders apparently offered the Palmieri package for Hall, but Adams believed they would get a better return, which ultimately they didn't. So Lou definitely taught the rookie GM something there. I'm just curious, guys, what is your opinions on that? I'll start with you, Brandon. Do you think Taylor Hall could have gone for anything more, or do you think Adams just took whatever he could get?
I still hold true, and I put this in my article that I wrote after the trade, that I think if they had done it sooner, if they had pulled the trigger sooner instead of waiting until midnight before the deadline, they possibly could have gotten a first round pick while his trade value was still sort of at the market range for a player like him, especially with his reputation. I mean, I said he would be a perfect complementary player on a good team, which is sort of what he is in Boston, right? And that's why he's said that he wanted to be there. But like you said, if he really wasn't going to waive unless he was going to the Boston Bruins, that's something Kevin Adams said himself too, right? He said he was pretty limited in the choices that he had. And if that's the case, then you're sort of backed into a corner. But I still hold true to the fact that I think if they had done it sooner, they could have gotten a first. Agree, disagree, Nick? Anything on that?
Yeah, again, that production is just it sticks out like a sore thumb. I think a lot of GMs just see that and are not willing to pay that price, even in a year where first round picks might not be as valuable. But yeah, I agree. I think again, Adams was put into it just a no-win scenario. And on top of everything, he's a rookie GM who doesn't have a lot of help in the front office. And it's just a situation where, everything, we knew this was a possibility coming into the season. Taylor Hall getting traded if the Sabres weren't performing well. Obviously, no one foresaw them performing this poorly, but you have to figure that there had to be a chance to get at least a little bit more, whether that was an additional draft pick, whether that was a second or third round pick. But I just don't see many positives out of this scenario unless Anders Bjork turns out to be a real steal. That'll be to be determined. Wasn't the only trade the Sabres made at the deadline, though. I believe a day or two earlier, they moved defenseman Brandon Montour, sending him to the Florida Panthers for a third round pick in the 2021 draft. The Panthers obviously very much needed a defenseman in the wake of Aaron Ekblad's injury. This trade was received, a little more warmly than the Hall deal. Not a steal for either side by any means, but we'll get into this. How do we view this return for Brandon Montour for the Sabres? Jordan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, honestly, based off the way Brandon Montour performed as a Sabre and the expectations that he had going into it, it was a pretty large disappointment, I would say, since his arrival from Anaheim. And honestly, to get that third round pick in return, that was actually pretty good, because he has I believe he has a $3.875 million cap hit. They didn't have to retain anything, by my understanding, and yeah, it's honestly a good deal. You get an asset back. They probably could have done more of those, honestly, but at least you get something for Brandon Montour. How about you, Brandon? What do you think?
I think that's a good return. That's where we saw him going, right? It was either Florida or the other teams that were in need of a right shooting defenseman, like Winnipeg. We said, I know Philly was even a choice, but I think Florida was the best fit for him as a player. And I think a third round pick is good in return. It was nice that he kicked his production up a little bit, right? As the Sabres started to go through that losing streak, and he was really picking it up. So maybe he wouldn't have gotten that if he wasn't playing so well. So good on him for that. I think a third's, pretty good to, a pretty good assessment of his trade value. And we as we segue into sort of a different topic here. I know one of you mentioned that Kevin Adams, Nick, you mentioned that Kevin Adams doesn't have much help in the front office, but that's about to change. As the rumors that have been spinning in the rumor mill is that he was going to interview Jason Karmanos, an established person with managerial experience in the NHL for the assistant GM position, ends up being hired for the associate GM position. Apparently, the distinction here is that he's also going to serve as a general manager of the Rochester Americans in the AHL and oversee player development and the analytics department. Jordan, buzzword here, analytics department, something that has been lacking for the Sabres. What do you think about the role that Karmanos has been thrust into here? Do you think he's going to be a success? Let's hear
I'll just say two words. Thank God. They needed
it.
somebody else. They still got the presidents of hockey operations, but they get Karmanos, who was on a part of that Pittsburgh team, when they made the runs to the Stanley Cup playoffs. He was heavily involved in those decisions. I know when Jay Fresh Hockey came on here, Jack kind of said he didn't really like Karmanos that much. They just needed a guy. They need somebody. It's better than nothing. And I saw also, I believe the Sabres only had one person in their analyticals department before this hire. So at least now they got two. They got somebody else. They're kind of progressing in that way. And yeah, I like the hire. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to get someone experienced in the room. We mentioned his experience with the Penguins. Carmanos actually has 3 Stanley Cups to his name. He was involved in the 2 most recent Penguins Cups and way back with the Hurricanes in 05-06, which Kevin Adams was a part of as a player. So the two have a bit of history in that regard. But yeah, just a guy who has a lot of experience in the NHL with front office decisions. I think it's another set of eyes and ears in the room. Obviously, we're going to see how the hiring or of the personnel in the front office is going to be conducted moving forward. But I think this is a good first step to try to get this rebuild going. And these guys are going to be the faces of yet another Sabres rebuild. And time will tell how it looks, how long it's going to take. I don't think it's going to be a short rebuild by any stretch, as much as they would like it to be. But yeah, we're gonna have to see how it goes. It's a little obviously very early in the process, but I think it's a good first step. So moving to more off the ice news, some injury news for a couple of players. Team captain Jack Eichel ruled out for the season officially. Was labeled a herniated disc in his neck. He will not return. Not a big surprise. Conflicting reports as to when any surgery might be, but all indications are he should be fully healthy for the start of the 2021-22 season. The other news, Linus Ullmark suffers a lower body injury on Tuesday's game against the Boston Bruins. Unsure of how long he'll be out. Dustin Tokarski got the start tonight against Washington. So we'll touch on these 2 injuries. Brandon, I'll start with you. Just any quick thoughts on the Eichel and Ullmark injuries?
Yeah, got some quick thoughts on Eichel and then some probably longer thoughts on Ullmark. Eichel, this season is lost. Don't rush him back. That would be plain stupid. Give him the time he needs to rehab. They don't want to go through the surgery, like the most, lengthy surgery process if they don't have to. So get him into rehab, see where he can get to. If he's ready for next season, that is a 100% success in my book. Linus Ullmark, though, that's more interesting because this is a hockey team, as we know, in the Sabres that needs a starting goaltender. Linus Ullmark has been the only, and I mean only, option this season for winning hockey games, and that's how it's going to be moving forward. And his injury history is concerning. If you're offering this guy a contract, I don't know if it's going to be a bridge deal. Likely, probably 2 years is something I think is fair to expect for a guy like him. But he missed a large part of last season. He missed a large part of this season, and now he's injured again. It worries me. I like him as a goalie, but it really worries me. Jordan, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add on Eichel too. It does seem like they're trying to avoid surgery at all costs. They're
Yeah.
trying to rehab the injury. We saw with Connor McDavid a few years ago when he could have opted for surgery in his knee. He ended up rehabbing it instead, and honestly, he would have missed time that next season, and he ended up being way better for it. So, I'll just say if Eichel can if he can rehab it instead of getting surgery, that'd be awesome. And for Allmark, get him out of there. You don't even need to play him. You signed Michael Hauser for a reason. Just play him if you really have to, because you're not really going to win any hockey games. And with that, guys, let's get into it. This is going to be kind of a fun segment. We're going to be grading the Sabres trade deadline. Sorry. So what did they do well? Which is kind of a funny discussion, I'm sure, and what they could have done better. So we're going to start with you, Nick. What is your grade for the Buffalo Sabres trade deadline?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think if you're looking at the individual deals, none of them are great, even going back to the Eric Stahl deal earlier in the season. I think as a whole, though, it's not terrible. You look at the draft capital they amassed, get a second rounder, a third rounder, and a fifth rounder. That gives them 5 draft picks in the first 3 rounds of this year's draft. Gives them capital to possibly move up in the first round to get another pick. So the individual deals, not impressive, especially the Hall one, a very disappointing return. But as a whole, I think they did okay as far as just getting assets. And at this point of the season, that's all you could really ask for. So as far as an overall grade, I'll give them a C, maybe a C/C minus. So not great by any means, but considering the circumstances, I think Kevin Adams did as well as you could have expected.
And let's go to you, Brandon.
Yeah, I'll step to the other side of the aisle here and be a little more mean-spirited to Kevin Adams. No, nothing against him personally, but I do not like what he was able to do or rather what he was unable to do with these trades and getting the returns. I mean, you look at who he shipped out, and Taylor Hall, Curtis Lazar, who even after Anders Bjork's 3 points as a Sabre, Curtis Lazar still has one more point than him this season. So you're looking at you get rid of Taylor Hall, Curtis Lazar, Brandon Montour, Eric Stahl, Jonas Johansson, and you only get draft picks and Anders Bjork in return. Draft picks are great. Still didn't get a first. But draft picks are great if you have a good scouting department, a robust scouting department who is going to be able to do something with those draft picks, especially in what many people are calling a very difficult kind of a wash of a draft. And I'm just not confident that the Sabres have the scouts in place or the managing in place to do anything with them or draft and develop good players. Maybe that will change with Karmanos in there, offering a sort of a different eye, an experienced eye for developing player talent and identifying talent. And I would say I'm going to go with a D plus, just to be a little bit more mean to our friend Kevin Adams. Jordan, I'm interested to hear your grade though. So fire away.
They get an F for many reasons. So first off, we're going to start. They didn't claim Victor Mete off waivers, so I don't know what they're doing, because he would be a top four defender on this team. They were literally the only other team besides Ottawa that could have claimed him too. It sounds like most other teams were planning on putting a claim for him. The Sabres, for some odd reason, didn't. And I just don't understand it at all. The Taylor Hall obviously trade, they obviously got a very severe lack of return there. Brandon Montour is fine, but why is Tobias Reeder still on this team? That's a guy we said, you could probably get a fifth round pick for this guy. I don't know why they're keeping certain players around like this. It's quite clear that Kevin Adams has got schooled. They should have sold as many players as they can and get more of those players. Like, why can't Stephen Fogarty just take a spot? That's what they could have done there. There were players on waivers that they should be claiming. Yeah, they claimed Drake Kajula. Big deal. We'll see him soon, but it's just awful. Awful. I don't like it at all.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think we can all agree it was not the most impressive display of general management this trade deadline. So that brings us to our mid-episode plug. You're watching Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share on Facebook, and catch the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed. So as we came on the air, quote unquote, tonight, the Sabres were still wrapping up a game against the Washington Capitals, and the Sabres actually handled the East Division leading Washington Capitals, a 5-2 victory against a Washington team that came in red hot. I believe had scored 14 goals in their previous two games, but the Sabres pulled out 5-2. Anders Bjork gets his first as a Sabre. Casey Middlestat, Sam Reinhart, Victor Olofsson, and Tage Thompson with the light empty netter also pitch in. Dustin Tokarski gets his first win as a Sabre, and I believe his first win in the NHL and going on 5 or 6 years here. So great game all around. Boys, we can touch on this real quick. Jordan, any thoughts from this game?
Well, my boy Arttu Ruotsalainen had a 92% expected goals for in this game. I really liked him, and Anders Bjork, honestly, I think is going to be an effective player on this team. I know a lot of people didn't like him just because of the whole fact that, you got this. It's basically, it was like a Lazar for Bjork trade, but honestly, with the history that he has to players in this organization like Jack Eichel, there was that funny video too of him on Twitter, I believe, of him like it was like some weird commercial he did like back when he was on the US development team. But he's a good guy, and honestly, you need to have some fun. The Sabres clearly, based off the quotes we saw from the players like Lazard that wants to stick it to the Sabres, it was just really nice to see some good guys come in. And I'm glad that Victor Olofsson scored a goal, and I think that this team's going to do well. And Casey Middlestat redemption arc continues because he scored a shorty in this one. What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm loving Casey Middlestat. I really am. He's really just looked like he's grown into whatever role he was supposed to fill. And now he's playing at first line center, and you got him alongside Skinner and Olofsson. Not bad line mates to have. And they've been an effective line. I mean, 2 of those players scored tonight. Even Skinner hasn't been terrible in the past, however many games. Sam Reinhart with that tip was real nice. He's been the Sabres best player this year, I think, hands down, on a consistent basis. I mentioned Anders Bjork has 3 points in 2 games as a Sabre, and that's super encouraging because, like you said, yeah, a lot of people, myself included, were really hard on that return. I'd love to be proved wrong. If Bjork can turn into a serviceable, top 6 forward, that would be amazing. I'd be really happy with that. Good to see Tokarski put up a fight and actually play like a NHL goaltender tonight. So that was nice. Good win against a good team. Hoping for some more of those in the last final stretch here.
Yeah, and with that, we can move on to our general NHL news. And with the trade deadline passing, guys, we know there's going to be a lot. But before we talk about that, Vancouver, it's a big situation here. And their next two games are postponed. Their game tonight, sorry, was actually postponed against Edmonton, I believe. And then their game against Toronto was postponed on Saturday after JT Miller really bravely stood up and, spoke out against this and how the players really aren't ready. The whole team ended up had a Zoom meeting with the NHL and NHL's Players Association, and it's quite clear that these games should have never been played. I'm assuming you guys agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw that earlier, not just with the, Vancouver Canucks, like games that shouldn't have been played, right? I mean, we've seen it with the Sabres way back in February and then almost again. Thank God it didn't turn into the same situation after the Devils games. But I mean, if anything, that proved that the NHL just has to take it really seriously. And if Vancouver's saying, look, like we can't play these games and they've got to take it seriously, right move to postpone it tonight. You're hoping they can get back into action sooner than later, just so that they have a fair finish to their season. But it's smart not to rush it. Definitely don't want to do that. So they're playing it smart, I think. Nick, anything on that?
Yeah, I think there is no upside to rushing these games back. I think there's an argument to be made they shouldn't play any more games at all, considering they're out of the playoff race. And if you rush them back, I think they have a few games slated against Edmonton and Toronto. And does anyone want to watch a Canucks team that wasn't good to begin with just get blown off the ice by Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews? I think they need to be real careful. There's talk about them playing maybe a few games against the Senators, a few extra games against Ottawa. We'll see how that goes. But I think the NHL overall made the smart decision not to rush these games back. And we've seen pretty strong evidence of how just how much COVID affects teams. You mentioned Buffalo, New Jersey as well was not the same after their COVID outbreak. And the Dallas Stars, another team, got off to a real slow start to the season after having to wait a couple of weeks to get started because of issues with COVID down there. So yeah, I think it's a situation that's still ongoing, but obviously the safety of the players has to come first and foremost.
Definitely, yeah. And so while their season has come to a standstill, other teams are in full swing here. And after the trade deadline, players are going to new teams and hoping to help them make a push down the stretch, whether that's to make the playoffs or to really help them get over the hump and win the cup. And let's start with the Nick Foligno trade headed to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Um, I think that's a huge trade for the Maple Leafs. It really shows a lot of confidence in that roster. And I think it was last week. It was after the Foligno trade when Kyle Dubas said that a player like Galchenyuk had really changed his opinion about what he thinks the forward group's goal as a collective should be, and he said that's sort of what made him want to go out and get Foligno, which I thought was a really interesting quote. Just what he thinks his forwards are capable of. Jordan, you got some Leaf swag in the background. Let me hear what your thoughts are on Nick Foligno.
Well, Kyle Dubas is a general manager that knows how to adapt on the fly. For whatever reason, he has the reputation for a long time that he's just some analytics nerd and that he doesn't value toughness. Well, guess what? He acquired Jake Muzzin, he even acquired Kyle Clifford. He's gotten Wayne Simmons, and now he's gotten Nick Foligno. So he's just gotten guys who are tough, but they also know how to play hockey. And the return was steep on this one. A first round pick, and the first and fourth round pick. Sorry, they do get Stefan Nason back because this was a 3-team trade in order to eat up the cap space. So they're getting Nick Foligno at a very discounted rate here at the end of the season. But for all of the crazy debates going on Twitter, Nick Foligno, if anything, you didn't give up anybody on your roster, right? So he's only going to add positive value. And it's easy to try to compare this to the Taylor Hall trade and say, oh, the Leafs should have just acquired Taylor Hall if you were going to spend all of this much draft capital on Foligno. But I think it's quite clear that Kyle Dubas just didn't want a player like Taylor Hall. And he clearly values a guy like Nick Foligno, and he believes that he will help that team win.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think you made a good point bringing up the Taylor Hall trade. Boston was a team that needed some extra scoring, assuming Taylor Hall starts to get back on the score sheet. Toronto's a team that's pretty well set on offense with the big guns they got there. Yeah, they need a player like Foligno because this is a team that's not interested in winning a couple playoff games. They're a team that needs to win a couple playoff rounds and make a deep run. And Foligno's the type of guy that they need in there. And that wasn't the only big trade of the trade deadline. We had one, actually a very late trade, might have been the latest trade of the deadline, as the Washington Capitals swing a big move. They land Anthony Mantha from the Detroit Red Wings for quite a haul. Washington sends back Jakub Vrana, Richard Panik, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick in 2022 for the big Detroit forward who scored a goal against the Sabres in Washington's loss tonight. This was quite a haul. Anthony Mantha is a very good player, I think, a legit top six forward, but the return was probably the biggest we saw of any deal at the trade deadline. So the Capitals obviously gearing up for another playoff run. Mantha is going to give them even more depth up front. So how do we see this return? And I think one point that is clear is Steve Yzerman knows what he's doing in Detroit, gets another haul for the Red Wings for their rebuild. So Brandon, I'll start with you. Takeaways from this big trade.
Yeah, I think the Detroit Red Wings are, I think it's fair to call both teams winners, I guess, for as far as what they were looking for, right? I mean, people praising Steve Yzerman and the Detroit Red Wings, I think, correctly. A first, a second, and Jake Vrana, who's already an established, young player with a lot of skill, a lot of offensive upside. Put someone like him with Dylan Larkin and see what happens, get some guns there in Detroit. And then Richard Panik, too, has been a good bottom six forward for a long time now. He can still be an effective player if that's what they're looking for. So veteran leadership there. Mantha, though, what they gave up for him, it tells me that Washington is pretty damn sure that he's going to turn out to be a very good player for a long time. And let's see if that happens. Did he score tonight?
Yeah, he
Yep.
did.
He scored tonight on the Sabres. Yeah. So let's see if he can score on other teams first. But yeah, no, I think where they are heading into the playoffs, if Mantha can put them over the top, that's a great trade for the Caps. And let's see how it plays out. Jordan, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I do. And the first point I'll make is that NHL general managers are really like university students procrastinating on their essays. They just wait till 2:59, bang, let's try to make a trade happen. But I think this is a really, really good trade here for Steve Yzerman. He's playing 5D chess with these other general managers. Like Jacob Verana was only getting third line minutes in Washington, but he was one of the more efficient goal scorers there. I mean, he's playing at a 50-point pace, and he just scored tonight for Detroit as well in this Red Wings debut. I think this works really well. You get amazing draft capital. I think Anthony Mantha too. He's one of the more he's really good. He ranks really well in certain metrics like WAR as well. So I think he actually will fit better getting to play with a guy like Nick Backstrom, who historically makes everybody better. So this is a really good move. And now we got to talk about all the other moves, specifically in the East Division. We're going to talk about all 8 teams here. So are they winners and are they losers? We're going to try to make this relatively quick. And we want to kind of talk about how it changes the playoff landscape in the East. But let's start off with Washington, who made this Anthony Mantha trade. I'm going to quickly go. I think they are winners, honestly. I'll say they're winners. Screw it. I'm going to say they're winners because they know that Anthony Mantha makes their team better. They gave up a ton. I'm saying they're winners. Do you guys have any differing opinions? Let's start with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I'll say they're winners. Let's just base it on what we think these two teams can do for the rest of the season, right? So in the future, I don't know how it's going to turn out for the Caps. That waits to be proven to see how Verana and Mantha pan out. But for this season, I think the Caps can be called winners. I think they did what they had to do to put themselves over the top and compete with the teams like the Islanders and the Penguins and who they have to. So I think they're winners.
Yeah, I think they're winners in the short term. In the long term, probably not so much. But the Capitals are the definition of a team that's in win now mode. And you know what? Every trade is a good one if you win. And flags fly forever. And if the Capitals are ever able to win another Stanley Cup, this is going to be a home run trade. So we'll see how that turns out. We'll move on to the Islanders. They made their big deal a couple weeks ago, bringing in Kyle Palmieri from New Jersey. We can touch on them. I don't know if they made any other big moves, but
yeah, they did. They got Braden Coburn for a 7th-round pick from Ottawa.
Okay, so some defensive depth to make that defensive team even better. So, any thoughts? We touched on the Palmieri trade last week, but any other thoughts on the Islanders, Jordan?
Oh yeah, they're totally winners coming out. Like, I mean, you lose Anders Lee, who's your best goal scorer, 30, 40 goal scorer, and you get Kyle Palmieri back. And, all you had to do is really give up a 1st-round pick. Travis Zajac scored in his Islanders debut tonight as well on the power play. So they're actually relying on them fairly too. And Braden Coburn, who honestly is pretty bad. You at least get a guy though. So in the playoffs, you want guys on your team. You don't want, AHLers. So I'll call them winners.
Yeah, and one of the other good teams. Oh, and by the way these teams are written out are the order they are in the standings. So it was Capitals, Islanders, and now in third place in the East Division standings, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who acquired Jeff Carter. And at where he's at in his career, I'll tell you what, I think Jeff Carter is a good fit for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. The Penguins are a total surprise to me this season. I did not think they were going to be where they are. I did not think they were going to be this competitive, but third in the division and a pretty sizable lead on the Bruins for that fourth spot. I think Jeff Carter's going to, help make them a little bit more competitive. Doesn't have the same scoring ability that he used to, but he's still, I think, a serviceable player and can put up points in the playoffs for sure. He's a playoff performer.
Yeah, I think it's a good pickup for the Penguins. Jeff Carter is going to bring even more championship pedigree to Pittsburgh, and yeah, he's a guy who you might lose track of for a few games, but you're going to look up one day in the conference finals, and he's going to have 2 goals and an assist. So for those games alone, I think the trade's worth it for Pittsburgh.
I'm going to take the opposite stance, guys. I'm going to call the Penguins losers. You get 36-year-old Jeff Carter, who's been pretty bad, by the way. There's a reason we haven't heard his name that much in LA, and it's not just because most people don't talk about LA. Jeff Carter has not been that great, and you traded this guy for assets. Now, yeah, they did retain half of his salary, which they were going to have to. He was making $5.1 million, but it's not a guarantee he's going to work out here in the third line, and you're paying $2.6 million for this player. I say they're losers. That's what I'm just going to say about that. And now we can.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Brandon?
I was going to say they could have gotten Patrick Marleau on a much more economic deal. Huh?
They could have, yeah.
Get him back again.
And we've talked a lot about Boston here, guys. They acquired Taylor Hall. They ended up getting Mike Riley as well for a 3rd-round pick. I really like their deadline. They're clear-cut winners here for me.
Yeah, they got some guy who only scored 2 goals in like 37 games, so I don't know about that. No, I think they're winners. I think let's hope Lazar plays because he's been a great 4th-line forward for the Sabres. I think he could be good in a playoff run and on a good team. Taylor Hall, if he picks it up, the Bruins, that's all they need. That makes them winners in this one. If Taylor Hall can start scoring for them, they've won. So that's what I got to say. Nick?
Yeah, I think they're winners, and it looks like right now the Bruins are slated to be the 4 seed in the East. And if I'm Washington or New York, who look like one of those 2 teams is going to be the 1 seed, I would not want to play Boston in the playoffs, especially if Tuukka Rask is able to come back. So I think the Bruins already had a very deep group of forwards, especially with that top line. I think they're going to be a tough outcome the playoffs. So we'll move to another team in the East, just outside the playoff picture. That'd be the New York Rangers, who did not do a whole lot. I don't know if the Rangers made any moves at the deadline. They're a team that's, I think, got one eye on the future. This was kind of a year they were playing with house money. So I'll say the Rangers are losers. I think they're on the outside looking in, obviously, with the playoffs, but kind of surprising they didn't really take any swings here.
Yeah, all they did was trade Brandon Lemieux for a 4th-round pick days before. They didn't really sell on anybody. And, they are kind of like a tweener team, and I kind of understand based off the previous deadlines why they might have taken that approach. I just want to see what they got in-house, but I could see them doing more in the offseason, honestly. But to me, I'll say they're losers.
I'll take the other side on this one. I'll call them winners because it shows that, the Rangers weren't supposed to make the playoffs this season anyway. At least I don't think so. And to be where they are right now, just, on the outside looking in, but still not completely out of it, like Buffalo. I think that's a win in their book, and especially to say, hey, we have confidence in this young core that we have, in this young group of players that we have coming up, and Lafreniere and Kako and Kravtsov and Shesterkin, who just got his first career shutout the other day, like guys like that, say, hey, we have confidence in this group, and we're gonna let them gel, let them keep building chemistry and keep going forward. I think that's a smart move, so I'll call them winners. And a team in a much different position now that we can move to is the Philadelphia Flyers. I had them way higher in my in my head preseason power rankings. I had the Flyers a lot higher. Here's what they did. A couple of things that they did. First of all, they waived Shane Gostisbehere, who cleared waivers. That was way back when. Another guy the Sabres didn't pick up. They extended Scott Laughton. A lot of people had him in trade talks, so he stays in Philly. And then they traded Gustafson to Montreal. What do we think about this? Let's go to Jordan.
Well, first off, they didn't just extend Scott Laughton. They extended him to $3 million for the next 5 years. And with any player that's like that on your bottom six, giving them 5-year contracts is never really the best idea. Eric Gustafsson was an offseason signing for them, free agent. I remember he actually put up 2 assists in his first game because that was the first game that happened since the NHL restart. So that's the only reason I remember that. But by all accounts, he was only really a power play specialist and awful defensively. Like this guy put up 60 points on Chicago a few years ago, but he still gets tossed around to all these teams just because he's not that good defensively. But at least Montreal gets a guy. And yeah, I didn't really like what the Flyers did here. Like just like they have been for the past few weeks now, they're losers.
Yeah, I agree. The Flyers have kind of become the rich man Sabres in that they are a dumpster fire, but maybe a classier type of dumpster fire, and a season that's just been torpedoed by bad goaltending and bad defense. No real shot now at getting back into the playoffs, barring a miracle run. And yeah, this was a team that a lot of people had as a dark horse Stanley Cup contender, and I think a lot of that had to do with Carter Hart. We all know the issues had this season. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Flyers as losers. And finally, we get to the New Jersey Devils. We mentioned they traded away Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac to the Islanders in advance of the trade deadline. They also sent Jonas Siegenthaler. They acquired Jonas Siegenthaler for a third from the Washington Capitals, and also Dmitry Kulikov on the move. So we can get into the Devils here, kind of sharing the East Division basement with the Sabres. So Jordan, any thoughts on the Devils deadline?
They are winners in my mind because Jonas Siegenthaler, guys, was only 23 years old. I know he wasn't really getting the chance in Washington, but this is a guy that I think could potentially be a stable NHL player. You know, for a 3rd-round pick, like you might as well go for it and get rid of him. You know, and acquire a guy like this on a team that clearly isn't going to be that good in New Jersey. You know, and you'd give. You know, you at least sell off guys, which the Sabres failed to do. You get send Dmitry Kulikov to Edmonton, you know, and you're able to just recoup some future assets. You know, the team is looking better. You're recouping draft picks, which is the big part. In New Jersey has a really strong scouting staff over there in analytical department. So I have all the trust in the world. I think they're going to be a decent team, potentially even next season.
Yeah, I mean, so that's former Sabre Dmitry Kulikov going the other way, but let's look at, I mean, yeah, for a second there, like I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but in this draft, it's gonna be so hard to, be successful and pick good players like on purpose, right? A lot of people are saying, so why not take a shot on a guy like Siegenthaler, who you already have a pretty good idea maybe of what he's going to turn into as a player, especially when you have a bunch of other young high potential, high ceiling guys that you haven't even tapped their potential really. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier still has a high ceiling. Sharon Govich has had a breakout season here. You have a stud goalie, I think, in Mackenzie Blackwood. Why not take a shot and try to add to that group? So I think I would say the Devils, you can call them winners here. I think, they are sharing the basement, like you said, with the Sabres, but I think it's a cleaner basement than the Sabres are living in right now. So
yeah, and some people might even ask why the Sabres didn't make the trade for Siegenthaler because they could use some guys. Well, why didn't they get Victor Mete when they could have gotten him for free and not even given up anybody? The question is, nobody knows.
Yeah. Say the same for Shane Gostisbehere too. A lot of people, he's been a weird player, right?
He's actually been really good recently too. I believe he has 8 goals.
He's been kind of the Flyers' answer to Tyler Myers from back in the day, a guy who had his best season as a rookie and just never really topped it and has kind of fallen off since then. But yeah, I think a guy, you take a shot on, but that's obvious that time has passed.
Definitely. Yep. And as this episode winds down to an end, unless anybody has any other parting thoughts, we will thank you for joining us. This has been Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook and on Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. And don't miss out on all the other great hockey content at thehockeywriters.com. As always, for Jordan and Nick, this is Brandon, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.